Hey everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ Live. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. Well, today is day 5 of ACLM week. ACLM stands for the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, an organization that if you're not familiar with, we really encourage you to check out. They're giving a discount this week on their courses. They have an amazing annual conference, and their members are awesome. And one is coming on every day this week. They're healthcare professionals. And to introduce today's guest, we have their executive director, Susan Benegas.
Thank you, Chef AJ. And we are just so honored to be showcased this week on Chef AJ Live. And as you said, the American College of Lifestyle Medicine is the nation's medical professional association for physicians and allied health professionals, healthcare executives, academics who are truly passionate about lifestyle medicine becoming the foundation of health and all healthcare. And, for your listeners and viewers, what is lifestyle medicine? It's the use of evidence-based lifestyle intervention, which includes a whole food, plant predominant dietary lifestyle, regular physical activity, restorative sleep, stress management, the avoidance of risky substances, and powerful social connection, using that as an intervention to treat, reverse, and prevent already existing disease. And we often say that if the dose is efficacious for treatment and reversal, then prevention is the natural byproduct. And ACLM was started in 2004 by physicians that saw that there was no other field of medicine that represented this. And, now we face an epidemic of chronic disease. We have over, 60% of all Americans that have chronic disease. We have 70% of all Americans taking prescription meds, 90% of all seniors, and it's truly unsustainable. And so ACLM and all of its members truly represent a galvanized force for change on a mission to transform health and redefine healthcare, where the focus is on identifying and eradicating the root cause of disease with the goal of health restoration, as opposed to simply disease management. And so we're excited this week, as you said, to enable your followers to receive discounts through our learning management system. All of our courses are CME accredited, continuing medical education, but even non-medical professionals can really benefit from the content and information. And so 10% discount this week through our lifestylemedicine.org/store. And all of the details can be found in your show call notes. And for our Food is Medicine course, Reversing Type 2 Diabetes and Insulin Resistance with Lifestyle Medicine, our board review course, just a whole array of courses. And so we hope that folks will take advantage of this opportunity. And it is my pleasure to introduce someone who has been a longtime member of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine and truly one of the foremost champions of the field. She's a physician with a passion not only for human health, but also environmental issues, because there is such inextricable connectedness of our food choices, not only on our human health, with what we eat and do not eat being the foremost cause of disease and death in our populations and around the world, but this inextricable connectedness to planetary health as well. She's the founder of the Institute of Human and Planatary Health at Doane University. And her goal with this has been to improve human health by transforming medical education and healthcare delivery to create a culture of healthy food grown sustainably for the betterment of both human and, again, planetary health. And even ACLM this past year issued a statement on nutrition that supports this real shift to plant predominant dietary lifestyle, not only for human health, but to rein in greenhouse gas emissions, to preserve our natural resources, and to rein in our chronic disease trends. So Amanda is really one of the foremost leaders in connecting these dots. She's a former member of the ACLM Board of Directors and co-chairs our Global Sustainability Committee with Dr. Neha Pathak. And so it is my pleasure to introduce today Dr. Amanda McKinney.
Welcome, Dr. McKinney. I remember you from a couple of films.
Yes, thank you. Well, thank you for having me today. I'm really glad to be back. And as Susan was saying, my focus has been on human health as a physician, but planetary health is ultimately the source. It's the bedrock of human health. We are completely dependent upon the health of our planet and our ecosystems. So this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and I hope everyone finds it interesting.
I think I will. I know
Okay.
Dr. McDougall will. That's his passion right now. He's been saying that Mother Earth is his patient.
Yes, Dr. McDougall and I have had lots of conversations, so it's good. Yes. All right, I'm going to share my screen here. Oh, potentially. Let's try this again. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about food pollution. And what food pollution really is it's the presence of toxic chemicals or elements in food that's not supposed to be there, or it's there in levels that are higher than we would normally find them in the background at background levels. And why this is important is because food pollution has serious impacts on human health. And food is oftentimes a vector for a lot of these chemical pollutants. And these pollutants are oftentimes called POPs or POPs, which are persistent organic pollutants. So these chemicals are persistent in the environment. They're everywhere. And they impact both death and disability from non-communicable diseases in ways that can be additive or even synergistic. And of the 21 compounds that have been designated as POPs, 11 of them, the primary exposure for humans for 11 of them is through food, primarily animal foods. And an example of this is in this, we talked about this additive or synergistic effect of these chemicals and the fact that they're found in animal foods. We know that red meat consumption in particular is connected to things like colon cancer. And part of that we know has to do with the animal protein itself, and sometimes it can be related to the iron, the heme-based iron that's in the meat. But it's also potentially part due to the carcinogenic pollutants that are in the meat. And there was a study done in Spain where they examined conventional and organically raised beef, chicken, and lamb. And they tested these animals for 33 different carcinogenic pollutants. And what they found was that none of the samples, whether the meat was raised organically or whether it was raised conventionally, none of them were free of these carcinogenic contaminants because, again, these things are persistent in the environment. And actually, the highest levels of carcinogenic contaminants were in organically raised lamb. So one of the other problems with these persistent organic pollutants is that a lot of them are endocrine disruptors. And what endocrine disruptors are is these are chemicals that act through estrogen and estrogen-related receptors. They induce oxidative stress or inflammation in the body, and they do this through epigenetic mechanisms. And epigenetics really means on top of your genes. So we all have genetic predispositions for stuff, but the genes are oftentimes turned on or turned off based on your environmental exposures, food being one of those primary ones. And these endocrine disrupting chemicals are oftentimes, that's how they act, is through this epigenetic modification of your own genes, contributing to the development of prostate cancers, breast and testicular cancers, diabetes and obesity, autism spectrum disorders, Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, ALS, multiple systems atrophy, which is an ALS-like disease, and as well as impaired fertility and even endometriosis. And there was a recent book that came out by Shanna Swan. She's an epidemiologist. And she put the statistic in her book that these endocrine disrupting chemicals are resulting in declining male sperm counts. We know that that male sperm counts have declined by 60% since 1973. And if the rate of decline continues as it has, sperm counts could be zero by 2045. These chemicals are also associated with shrinking penis size and testicular volume. And in some parts of the world, the average 20-year-old woman is not as fertile as her grandmother was at the age of 35. And in 2014, I wrote a paper about these topics. And at that time, based on dietary issues, obesity, et cetera, approximately 19 to 20% of the reproductive aged population in this country was either subfertile or infertile because of these types of issues. So as I mentioned before, we've been seeing a rising incidence and prevalence of autism spectrum disorders, things like ADHD and other sensory processing disorders. And if you see this, this graphic on the screen, since 2004, the prevalence of autism has increased from 1 in 166 children to 1 in approximately 45 children. And again, there's concern that if the rate of rise continues as it has, it'll be close to half of all children by 2050. So examples of these endocrine disrupting chemicals are things like BPA, some pesticides, flame retardants, PFAS. People have probably heard of PFAS chemicals, which are these forever chemicals. And so an example of this is that there are 2 Air Force bases in the US. One was near Oscoda, Michigan, and the other one was in Arizona. And because of these PFAS chemicals, people who live near that Air Force base in Oscoda have been told not to consume deer meat from that region. And the people who live near the Luke Air Force Base in Arizona have been told not to consume the water because of these PFAS chemicals that have contaminated the environment. Phthalates, PAHs, alkylphenols, solvents, some metals even. And these chemicals are absolutely ubiquitous in our lives. They're very difficult to get away from. And part of the problem with this is that these exposures, because I talked about the fact that these are epigenetic modifications. So the gene gets altered by the chemical itself. But those genetic alterations can then be passed down for as many as 4 generations. And we've seen this in mothers who smoke. So in women who smoke during their pregnancies, there are direct epigenetic modifications to the fetus itself, increasing the risk of that child developing cancers later on in life. But it also impacts the fetus's reproductive cells. So then when that child grows up to adulthood and then reproduces, those genetic modifications have already been made in utero, and those get passed on down the road. So the reason that food, and animal food in particular, is important in this conversation is because of the way that these POPs bioaccumulate. And what I mean by that is that these chemicals are often lipophilic, they're fat-loving chemicals. And so when the animal gets exposed to them in the environment, it accumulates in their fat, and then it gets passed on through the food chain to the top where we tend to live. So we're getting, not only are we getting accumulated chemicals or toxins from the environment in the animal fat, as the animal gets bigger and goes higher up the food chain, that it becomes magnified and you get higher and higher levels as you go up the food chain. So oftentimes human babies are at the very tippy top of this food pyramid, and human babies can actually receive 20% of their mother's lifetime accumulated POPs just through breastfeeding alone. And that may be, we know that breastfeeding confers protection against breast cancer. And one of the reasons may be because women are offloading a lot of their toxins through the breast milk through that process. So again, the primary sources of exposure for these POPs come from dietary sources, primarily fish, and fish particularly not just through the environment, but also through microplastics that they're consuming, dairy and meat, and also plastic food wrappers and containers and those kinds of things. Another chemical that's often talked about is glyphosate or Roundup. And this is a pesticide that is used fairly ubiquitously in agriculture. Farmers in 1987 applied about 6 to 8 million pounds of this pesticide. And then in 2014, it had increased to 240 million pounds. This has been classified by the International Agency for Research on Cancer as probably carcinogenic to humans. And it has been implicated in cases of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And because of the synergy with other ingredients that's in Roundup, the product itself, it's actually 125 times more toxic than just glyphosate, which is the primary active ingredient. And it was quoted in a study that despite its relatively benign reputation, Roundup was among the most toxic herbicides and insecticides ever tested. Glyphosate is found in the global soybean supply as well as in bread. And part of what, so even if seeds are oftentimes seeds are genetically modified to be able to tolerate Roundup application. So you might have a genetically modified soybean seed that grows into a plant. That plant is then resistant to the Roundup. So it kills the weeds around it, but it doesn't kill the soybean plant itself. However, what is also happening is in certain climates, Roundup is actually sprayed on wheat and oat and barley crops to kill the crop faster than it would naturally dry out and die or go into its dormant state so that they can harvest it faster. So that's why it's so ubiquitously found in the wheat supply and in bread. And through this lecture, I should have talked a little bit, I talk about the human health impacts of these various processes, but I also talk about specific planetary health impacts. And again, I do that because humans are entirely dependent upon the health of the planet and our ecosystems. So the planetary health impacts of this food pollution or food waste primarily is that we waste about 1/3 of all of our food annually. And in developed nations, about 30% is lost at the retail or consumer level, whereas 20% is lost in sorting and grading. And we send tons of food waste to the landfills, which account for about 14.1% of our human-related methane emissions. And as we know, methane is a much more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide even. So if we were to eliminate all of the food waste in landfills, that would be the equivalent of getting 1/5 of all the cars off of the road. And changing from a standard American diet to even a lacto-ovo vegetarian diet would reduce emissions by about 28%. There are also pollutions or pollutants related to agriculture itself. Synthetic fertilizers, as you can see, between 1960 and 2014, it was increased from 930 kilograms per hectare to 1,770 kilograms per hectare. That China, Brazil, Argentina, and the US are the largest consumers of these pesticides. And in 1990, when we began tracking pesticides, it was about 1.2 million pounds were being applied annually, whereas in 2014, it was 2.8 million tons. And again, these have significant impacts on soil and water pollution as well as air pollution. And with regard to the planetary health impacts of soil and water pollution, nitrogen and phosphorus are used as fertilizers, and these over half of what's applied is actually just runs off into the environment. It's not even being taken up by the plants. And this leads to eutrophication, which is there's too many nutrients in the water systems, and this leads to blooms of algae, lack of oxygen and dead zones in the oceans and the waterways. And then in the US, 65% of all of our estuaries and coastal waters are at risk of eutrophication because of this. Likewise, pesticides, neonicotinoids in particular, can cause colony collapse disorders of the bees. And this pollinator decline is a real threat to global food security because 75% of our crops actually require insect pollination. And so if we were to have a complete loss of pollinators globally, we would have a reduction in calories of about 5 to 8%, which doesn't seem like a lot, but there would be a global deficit of fruits, vegetables, coffee, tea, and cacao. And this is really problematic because they provide the majority of polyphenols and antioxidants in the global food supply. So in the US, the number one source for the vast majority of people of antioxidants in the US is tea and coffee. Of course, this can also lead to agricultural air pollution also causes planetary health problems. Agriculture itself is responsible for about a third of all global greenhouse gas emissions. Agriculture is a prime driver of deforestation, 80%. Land use change, which is this conversion of land from whatever it's being used for sitting idly to agricultural use, is responsible for about 11% of our greenhouse gas emissions annually. And this has really been shown because, the impact can be shown by the fact that if you look between 1970 and 2013 at the amount of meat and dairy that we consumed then versus now, in 1970, people were consuming on average 28 kilograms of meat annually, whereas in 2013, it was up to 43 kilograms. And dairy has remained about the same, but it has increased from about 79 kilograms to 85. Again, land use change. So this is deforestation and changing land from potentially prairies or grasslands to agriculture. So globally, what we have done is that 70% of our grasslands, half of all the savannas, 45% of our deciduous forests, and 27% of our tropical forests are now gone. And 20% of the Amazon has been deforested. And it's been estimated that if we reach 40% of the Amazon being deforested, that will be a tipping point from which we cannot return. So what are the human health impacts of this agricultural pollution? Well, again, as I mentioned, a complete pollinator loss would result in some really severe micronutrient deficiencies. And the estimate is that if we had a complete pollinator loss, there would be a 1.42 million increase in global annual deaths from non-communicable diseases. And there would be 27 million more disability adjusted life years. So in other words, 27 million more life years of people living with disabilities because of a loss of pollinators and the foods that they provide. Half of 50% pollinator loss would be an additional 700,000 deaths annually and 13.2 million daily adjusted life years, disability adjusted life years. And again, as we know, pesticides are linked to multiple forms of cancer. Atrazine, which is the second most, so glyphosate and Roundup is the most commonly used pesticide in the US. Atrazine is number 2. It is also an endocrine disruptor, and it can cause fetal toxicity and low birth weights. And nitrate contamination from fertilizers in the drinking water can cause birth defects, blue baby syndrome, which is kind of like a sudden infant death syndrome, as well as other types of cancers. And corn production in the US alone is associated with 4,300 premature deaths every year just because of the reduced air quality, because of the ammonia emissions, which is the nitrogen fertilizers that they spray on the fields. Other human health impacts of agricultural pollution include antimicrobial resistance. So fungicides, which are fungus killers that are sprayed on different types of crops, can lead to antifungal resistance and antifungal medications. And antibiotic resistance is a really significant problem as well. 80% of antibiotics are used in the US are used in the production of livestock. And in the US, this has resulted on an annual basis of 2.8 million antibiotic resistant infections and around 3,000 or 35,000 deaths annually just from antibiotic resistant infections that we do not have antibiotics to treat. Globally, this is 1,900 deaths every day. People are dying of antibiotic resistant infections with 700,000 deaths annually. And this was from the WHO Assistant Director General for Health Security, who said that post-antibiotic era in which common infections and minor injuries can kill, far from being an apocalyptic fantasy, is instead a very real possibility for the 21st century. We also know that in addition to funguses and or fungi and bacterial infections, we know that pandemics, viral pandemics, can also be a real problem when we're talking about agriculture, because the transmission of influenza is a real concern. And whether it's an avian swine flu, or excuse me, an avian flu or a swine flu, these flus can get passed on, and there's a really high transmissibility and pathogenicity that develops in these confined operations where we have massive amounts of poultry, massive amounts of swine living in close confines with one another. These viruses mutate, they get out into the world, and they can cause pandemics. The 1918 flu pandemic was the result of an avian flu. And that caused 50 million deaths annually or globally, that pandemic. We also know that from our own current pandemic, that as we deforest and as we convert land and we encroach on wild spaces, we're diminishing biodiversity, but we're also exposing ourselves to these species that continue to thrive, which are things like rats and bats. And these are oftentimes host animals for different viruses, novel viruses that we have, as humans, have never been exposed to. And so they can potentially make the jump from animals to humans. So there is good news, though, that if we were to shift to a more plant-based diet, and so there was this article called in Nature Food from January 10th of this year. And what they found that if we were to adopt the Eat Lancet Planetary Health diet, which you can see here on this plate, which is a plant predominant diet, and if the 54 high income countries, which actually only make up 17% of the global population, if just the 17% of the global population who has the means to do so were to adopt this planetary health diet, it could reduce annual agricultural production emissions by 61%. And it would help sequester the equivalent of about 14 years of global agricultural emissions if the spared land was restored to its antecedent natural vegetation. So what that means is that one of the things that happens when we grow crops to feed to livestock, instead of growing food that can be directly consumed by humans, we're requiring far more land space to grow those crops than we would actually need to feed the whole human population. So by doing this, by switching to this type of diet, we could have a really significant impact on what we're doing to both human and planetary health. And I didn't put it in my presentation, but I think a really staggering statistic that I wanted to share was that when you look at the entire weight of all of the animals on the planet, so you look at humans and our livestock and wild animals, 96% of the actual weight of animals on the planet is made up of humans, which are 36%, and livestock, which are 60%. So only 4% of the mass of animals on the planet by weight are made up of wild animals. And 70% of all of the birds on the planet now are chickens and turkeys. So those are really staggering numbers in my estimation. Okay, and that's what I have. So I'm happy to have conversations and discuss more.
Wow. As I was watching your presentation, I just wonder why it seems that the environment is less cared about than the other reasons, but like when people go vegan or plant-based, it's often for their own health or maybe for animal, to stop animal cruelty. But it just seems like the environment is an afterthought for a lot of people.
Yeah. And I think that has to do partly with the way that humans are sort of wired to think. We are really, we evolved to be sort of short-term thinkers. And we did live, we have lived in harmony with our ecosystems and our environment really until the advent of agriculture about 12,000 years ago was when really all of this shifted. And one of my mentors told me once, he said, he was a marine biologist, and he said, the planetary health aspect of this is, the Planetary Health Alliance, their focus was planetary health, which was really more about the intersection of the health of the planet and human health. And once we start to focus on human health, humans are much more likely to listen to the message and then make that connection. But it's just the way we're wired. And it's, I'm hoping that the message is getting out there so that we can start to make some changes.
Do you think it's possibly because like your health impacts you right now, how you feel, but the environment is a someday maybe?
Exactly. It's no different than sort of the climate change. It's like, oh, that's, because we talk about it in terms of 2050, this might happen, or 2100, this might happen. That's too far outside our range of thinking, right? I mean, we can, most people make 5-year plans, maybe 10-year plans at the most. But most of us are just sort of living day to day and just wondering what we're going to have for supper, right? So it's hard to think in those types of timescales, and it's hard to imagine, because it's such a vast, since the globe is so vast, it's hard for us to imagine what we actually might be doing to it.
It's kind of like what people like when they go on a cruise and just eat an egregious amount of food. They don't even think about the ramification, like in a week, how much weight they're
Absolutely.
I think we don't think too much about the future sometimes. It's just right now. So zero sperm count. I mean, that's not good.
Well, it's not. I think that there are probably some, I don't agree with this perspective, but I think there are some people who would think that that's actually maybe a good thing. If humans, for fewer of us, maybe not making so many problems for the planet and the other animals and inhabitants that we share it with. But it is a sobering statistic. And it's something that I worry about for my own children. And I was a practicing OBGYN for 10 years. And I saw this pretty consistently, that we had not only male reproductive issues and infertility, but female related reproductive issues and infertility related to polycystic ovarian syndrome and lack of ovulation or fewer ovulations than normal because of obesity. And that's the thing too, is it's not just the obesity that can cause problems with fertility, but just like animals, like the livestock, they are getting exposed to these chemicals in their environment, and they accumulate those chemicals in their fat. So the more fat that we have on our own bodies, the higher our own stores of these toxic chemicals are. So when you lose weight, a lot of times you're losing those chemicals along with it. So that's a really important piece of this that I think we don't often talk about in lifestyle medicine or in the food movement itself.
Well, Emily, who's watching live, says, well, how do we stop the use of glyphosate?
That's a great question. So the only thing that you can do really for yourself is to purchase organically grown foods. And that has to be from beginning to end. And otherwise, there's really no way to do it. As far as getting farmers to stop using it, certainly the European Union has made steps in banning different pesticides. That the European Union has banned neonicotinoids that impact the pollinators. But in terms of glyphosate, that's going to be a tall order, because what's happened is that the seed companies, like Monsanto, those types of companies, they have created these genetically modified seeds, and they have made the accompanying pesticides and things to go along with it. And so farmers get into this. My colleague and I in the Institute call it the treadmill. And once they go down that path of growing these crops that are genetically modified and using these pesticides, it's very difficult to get off of that treadmill, because farmers will grow what they get paid to grow. And so as long as we continue to buy and purchase these foods, that's what they're going to grow. That's just the simple reality of it. So it's going to take some serious effort at the federal level to change the incentives for people involved in agriculture.
Do you think that the majority of the people don't know, they don't care, or they're just not convinced that it's going to affect them in their lifetime? Like kind of get away with it. Like, I can eat a little bit of this. Not going to catch up with me for a while.
Right. I think it's all of the above. I think that I think the vast majority of people are just totally unaware. And I think of the ones who've maybe heard about it, there's still a lot of this notion that, well, yeah, it's there, but what am I going to do about it? I can't do anything about it. So I'm just going to, go on my daily routine, because I have to worry about getting up and going to work and making sure my kids are getting to school and figuring out what I'm going to feed them and do it all on a budget and, all of those things. So, and also minimization, because, just like what you were saying about the cruise ship, you get on the cruise ship and you eat this massive amount of food. And unless you feel terrible right then and there, right? Like if you're lactose intolerant and you eat cheese, well, you're going to have some ramifications from that are pretty immediate, that are going to warn you not to eat cheese again, right? But these cumulative effects over small amounts over time, we don't feel them, we don't notice them, we don't, there's no instant impact. And so we put it out, well, I did, it's like I ate this and I was fine, so I'll be fine tomorrow, right?
It's like with smoking.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
I understand that not all doctors are going to be vegan or recommend a vegan diet, but you would think because they went to medical school, they would at least understand the antibiotic part of raising livestock. And you had mentioned about how many deaths are from antibiotic resistance. You would think that even if they felt we should eat meat or needed to eat meat, or they personally wanted to eat, I don't see doctors addressing this.
No. And it's really because of the siloed nature of our society in general. I mean, we have a very reductionist, very specialist approach to everything. And what I have discovered, or what I discovered when I was practicing medicine, is that my colleagues were, they were well educated in medicine. They were good physicians, but they weren't paying attention to any of these other issues, right? Because it was outside of their specialty, was outside of their wheelhouse, so to speak. And so a lot of physicians just don't recognize the fact that the antibiotic resistance is actually that the source, or that the real problem is the way that we're raising animals. There has been a lot in healthcare specifically, there's been a lot of attention paid to antibiotic resistance, but it's really from the perspective of, well, what are we as physicians doing wrong, right? Our prescribing patterns, making sure that we're prescribing the right antibiotic for the right bacterial infection, prevention of infections, that has really been the focus, rather than saying, okay, well, it's kind of the analogy of the bodies, coming down the river. We keep pulling the bodies out of the river, but we're not going upstream to find out who's throwing the bodies in the river to begin with. Because we just don't have this sort of 50,000 foot view of the whole system, and how they're in these different facets of these systems are impacting one another.
Well, listen to this question from Annette. It's very poignant, and I've heard other people say similar things. Sometimes I do wonder what little old me can do. How much of an impact would I really make?
So that's a really good question. And the reality is that none of us can, on our own little decisions really have no impact, okay? But collectively, right, we can make a difference. So the idea is not to put a lot of pressure on yourself to make, to live as a hermit and grow all of your own food and never fly in a plane, and to do all these things to try to help the environment, right? Those things are good, and I think we should do as much as we can as individuals. But the idea is really to maximize your impact. So you can talk to other people, you can join groups that are focused on these types of issues, and that are doing things collectively as groups to bring attention to these issues. You can donate money to good causes that are impacting these types of issues. But it's really about sharing the knowledge that you have, doing the best that you can do on a day-to-day basis, and finding ways to maximize your own personal impact through collective action.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, when people say things like Annette, I think about that starfish analogy, where they walked on the beach and the little boy was throwing the starfish in, and so what difference does it make? Well, it does to that one,
Right. That's right.
Yeah, never underestimate. So Kathy says, I often throw veggies or peelings in my garden to decompose. I thought that was feeding the soil. How is this different than food in dumps that then produce methane gas?
So that's a great question. So composting, which is what you're doing, is Kathy, is that the name? Composting is the natural decomposition. And when you do it in that way, you are feeding your soil. And the soil then sequesters the emissions and the gases that are off-gassing from the decomposition. Landfills, however, are just everything, right? Landfills have food waste in there, but there's also dirty diapers and tires, and there's all sorts of things in landfills. Think about all the things that you throw in your trash can every day, and those are the sorts of things that are going to the landfill. So the idea is that by taking, if we separate out our food waste and we compost it, you're still getting some release of those gases. But we actually looked at we did a study that if we were to start to compost our food waste nationally, and then capture the biogases that are coming off of that decomposition process, you can use that biogas to actually displace fossil gas use. But even without that type of system, composting your food waste is absolutely the right way to do. Don't put it in the landfill. Put those nutrients back into the soil where they can be taken up and reutilized.
Great, thank you. And here's a nice comment. Where did it go? Amy says, I'm glad to be here, but this is hard to listen to. I feel powerless.
Yeah, me too. And that's okay. It's okay. The idea is not to make people feel fearful or to make you feel hopeless or despondent. That's actually not the goal here at all. The goal is to, again, educate. Now you have that piece. So my whole purpose in life is to talk about these issues. I know as an individual, I have a compost bucket on my counter. I try to feed my kids the best way I can. But I know at the end of the day that I'm still a cog in the wheel. But I can talk about these issues and I can educate other people just like you. And now you can take that information and start to educate other people and talk about these issues as important. Because the more that we know as a collectively, that's again how we're going to start changing our priorities and making an effort at trying to change these issues.
Yeah. Mandy says, how can we stop the deforestation of the Amazon?
It's going to require, unfortunately, we have some political leaders globally that are not focused on, they're not focused on these issues. And so it's really all about economics for them. Which is unfortunate because the economics in the short term are beneficial, but in the long term, they're absolutely devastating. It's going to require the people of the Amazon to stand up and try to elect new leaders and to stop the process. There are, it's a dangerous situation. There are activists that are trying to stop the deforestation, because the reason they're deforesting the Amazon is to graze cattle and to grow soybeans to feed to cattle. So again, it's about stopping the eating of cattle, right? That's number one. But it's a dangerous situation for these people. Because they're being murdered. Activists that are trying to stop the deforestation of the Amazon are actually being murdered. So there's not a lot we can do as individuals, but we do have to, I think that the best thing that you can do is to maximize your impact by educating yourself on the issue, and then reaching out and being part of organizations that are doing something to try to actively stop it.
Yeah. Well, and Apple says, how do you process despair and apathy?
Yeah. So what I do is compartmentalize, and that's what we all have to do. So, I'm going to talk about this issue. And I'm going to feel bad about it. And I'm going to do some reading, and I'm going to give talks, and I'm going to teach, but then I'm going to stop and I'm going to focus on something else and go enjoy the beauty of the world that exists, because there's still a lot of beauty and there's still a lot of good and there's still a lot of joy to be had. So it's important to, take some time to focus on these issues and do those things, but then put it away, put it on the shelf, and go do something else, and focus on the positive. That's the only way that we as individuals who care about these issues are going to be able to prevent burnout, prevent becoming apathetic, and then just falling into despair. So certainly we don't want anyone to fall into despair.
Thank you. And then here's a question from Sherry. Does Dr. McKinney have ideas for improving our global picture?
Yeah, I do. And I'm actually part of a group. I'm a collaborator in a group called the Planetary Limits Academic Network. And it's basically, we're a group of academics who have decided that, that it's our tribe, right? We recognize that we're coming up on some really hard planetary limits in terms of, our ability for our species to survive and maintain. And there are going to be some hard times for us as humans. But it doesn't mean it's the end. It's not, I don't see it as Mad Max. I don't see it as, I don't see a utopian future, but I don't see this terrible dystopian future. But there are things that there's going to be some hard times, and there are going to be some things that we have to do as a species in order to maintain our societies. And the Planetary Limits Academic Network is a group of academics who are working on plans. Plans for healthcare. How are we going to maintain a viable healthcare system, energy systems, agricultural systems? So I guess take heart that we're working on these things. And if you're interested to know more about it, you can look at the Planetary Limits Academic Network's website to learn a little bit more. But there are people out there talking about these issues and working on these issues. So
yeah, well, it seems like the majority of the people don't even make the connection between what they eat and their health, let alone planetary health.
For sure. For sure. And the truth is that the thing that I love so much about lifestyle medicine is that just by changing what you eat and changing what you put into your body has a huge impact on your own personal health, but you're having an impact on the planet, on the health of the planet when you do that as well. And so I think that even though, again, it's about talking about these issues and so even if somebody isn't open to the idea of talking about the planet, the health of the planet and all these other things, I think that even if you can just help them focus on themselves, right, and doing the right thing for themselves to help themselves feel better or reverse a chronic disease or what have you, by doing that, you're not only having an impact on that person's health, but you're having an impact on the health of the planet as well.
Absolutely. I hear this question quite a bit from people in some of the summits I've done, and it's from Roseanne, and she says, where do the toxins go when you lose weight? Into the bloodstream? How are they excreted? Is there concern for the circulation of these toxins?
Yeah, so the answer is that we do excrete them. We excrete them through our waste, our bowel movements and urine, and those go back into the environment, and they will be here, some of them forever, some of them for a long time. But again, when you lose the weight and you're not harboring the toxins in the body anymore, they're back out into the environment. You can prevent reconsuming them by changing what you're eating and not consuming the animal foods per se. So because these are so fat loving, these chemicals are so fat loving, if you stick to the plant foods that are really low in fat, you're going to have a much better or a much reduced load of these pollutants.
Yeah. Kathy says, what do you think about recreational fire pits? I don't even know what that is.
Recreational fire pits. I mean, if you're burning wood outside, I'm assuming it's kind of a burning wood outside, sitting around the fire pit. There's not really a problem with those in terms of, I mean, yeah, you're burning wood, so you're releasing some greenhouse gases and some particulate matters and things, but they're fairly small scale. Now, if everybody in the world was doing it on a daily basis, that'd be a real problem. But if you're outside and you're not breathing the smoke in that's the main thing, is you don't want to be in a confined space breathing that smoke in.
Yeah. So how can we support your work? And are you active anywhere where somebody could get more of you?
Yeah. So again, I'm the founder and executive director of the Institute for Human and Planetary Health at Doane University. And so you can find me there. I'm not a very good social media person, I have to admit. I have social media accounts, but not very active on them, but you can find me there. And you can also find me at Doane University as well. And you can reach out through there. So, and LinkedIn, you can find me on LinkedIn. So
what I was reading your bio, and what is the apothecary, the A&A Apothecary?
Oh, yeah. So part of the so A&A Apothecary is A&A is Amanda, and Andrea is my partner. Andrea, she's an organic chemist, and she and I share a love of cannabis medicine. And I am also very involved in plant medicine writ large. And part of the Planetary Limit Academic Network plan for some of the healthcare issues is to really focus on plant medicine and those kinds of things. But A&A Apothecary is really us providing different types of cannabinoid medicines for people with different types of conditions, whether it be anxiety or pain, those types of things, topicals, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I think that's interesting because you were an OBGYN, but practicing OBGYN, and now your patient is everybody's mother.
That's right. I like that. I think
So
I'll take that.
You kind of stayed in the field. Well, thank you so much, Dr. McKinney.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And you, I want to say that you are doing good work, and you're part of the solution by talking about these issues.
Thank you so much. And thanks all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. Please come back tomorrow when we have another wonderful physician from ACLM, Dr. Megan Griego, who's going to be talking about hunger, taste, appetite, and satiety. Maybe that'll help people wake up. Thanks again, Dr. McKinney. Bye-bye.